Hello, welcome back to my haunted library. It's Regina. So before I get into the main discussion here about shock rock, I just wanted to mention a few things. First of all, thank you for anyone who left a comment on my last video, encouraging me with my channel and kind of the direction I'm going with. I think I'm going to be doing more of these like weekly videos that are a little longer with timestamps. It just fits into my schedule a little more than going like 3 times a week. So I appreciate the support. So I've been reading a couple things that I wanted to discuss first, and then also a couple movies, just briefly before we get into the main event. So I started reading, well, I picked up, again, I had already started this, Pearl in the Mist by V.C. Andrews. This is book 2 in the Landry series, so I like to do a lot of reading on Sunday. That's kind of my reading day. I don't usually write any of my fiction. I'll do like a blog post and spend most of the day just sitting on the sofa reading, which I love to do. So yesterday I tore through about 200 pages of this book, so I'm almost, just have a little more toward the end. And I just absolutely love it. It's so much fun, and I think I will just continue reading the entire series. So I plan to do probably either a separate review on this or maybe group a couple of them together. But let me know in the comments below if you love the series as much as I do. And I'm going to also watch the second Lifetime movie, and so I'll do a whole video about this. But I just wanted you to know that I'm back on my V.C. Andrews kick and having a great time. So another thing I read this past weekend are 2 works by my friend Matt Wall over at Paperback Junkie. I bought 2 of his, I guess they're like zines. It's almost like it's mimeographed. Not quite, but I can almost smell the mimeograph ink. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, I know I'm a lot older than most of you. If you know what mimeograph is and you know what it smells like, leave me a comment below. There's actually a funny scene in a really good movie, kind of from my generation, which is Fast Times at Richmond High, where they all are breathing in the ink when the teacher passes out the test to get a buzz or something. It's kind of funny. That is an old joke, and no one but someone my age is going to get it. Anyway, so I read both of these works, Anxious and Anxiety. I'm not sure which order that goes in, but these are short stories. And Pharma Phoenix Rises. Because I'm familiar with Matt's writing through some of his short stories and poetry, I knew what to expect. And I have to say I was laughing out loud at a lot of this. And the short stories in particular really made me laugh. The poetry I found a little more serious, but the short stories are kind of just self-conscious musings, I guess you would say. And I probably learned more about Matt's body parts and nether regions than I ever really wanted to know. But I was laughing the entire way. Really honest. It has a kind of a Bukowski edge and quite entertaining. The poems too are really good and very heartfelt. Like, I like Matt's style because it's very honest and kind of almost masochistic in its self-consciousness. That spoke to me in a lot of ways. I'm trying to find one poem that I'll share with you. All right, so this poem is, I think, pretty appropriate because it's pretty PG rated, and it's also about rock and roll, I guess, a little bit, and that fits in with today's theme. So here we go. The Steel That Can Soothe by Matt Wall. There is something about a pedal steel or steel guitar that just soothes the soul. I can listen to old Hank Williams for hours on end, especially at night when I've been drinking. All the anger, anxiety, fear, hatred, all those horrible feelings, they just melt away. When you hear the slide go up and down slowly, it's the warmest and coldest feeling at the same time. I can't explain it, but try it sometime. It takes you to another place, a better place. Even if the things there are worse, it somehow feels better. I like that one a lot, and I am also a Hank Williams fan. So check out Matt's work. I'll leave a link to his stuff below and his channel. All right, I've also been watching some horror suspense films on TCM. They don't have a lot, but they have a few. And I love TCM. I always like to support that channel. No commercials, no BS, just straightforward films. So I watched Alice, Sweet Alice, which was originally titled Communion. It came out in 1976. American slasher film co-written and directed by Alfred Soule and starring Linda Miller and Brooke Shields, a very young Brooke Shields little kid, in her film debut. This is set in 1961 New Jersey. So it's a 70s film that is set in the early 60s, very much during the Kennedy era. The film focuses on a troubled adolescent girl who becomes a suspect in the brutal murder of her younger sister at her first communion. So little Brooke Shields gets killed earlier in the film. I don't think it's giving too much away, as well as in a series of unsolved stabbings that follow, inspired by Nicholas Roeg's Don't Look Now. Well, I see that resemblance because there is a yellow slicker that's used, and I think in Don't Look Now it's a red slicker. Little girl running around the canals of Venice in a red slicker. That's a very creepy movie and a really good one. So yeah, this movie, Grumpy Andrew from Grumpy Andrew's Horror House did a great review on it. I'll link it below. I really enjoyed this a lot, and it was really like looking at my childhood in every way, looking at the clothes and all of the Catholic stuff, everything that's in that movie. That was my childhood growing up in a very Catholic family. I mean, the clothes, I remember wearing the white Mary Janes, the communion dress, and I even got a little triggered because in my family there was an issue between me and my younger sister over a communion dress. I've done art pieces about this. It's something I've discussed with my therapist at length. So when I was watching it, I was kind of like, oh, wow. And my husband said, oh, does this sound familiar? And I was like, yeah, but I mean, I didn't kill my sister over it, but yeah, it was a thing. So I was watching this movie with one eye over my shoulder thinking, who was reading my diary? But anyway, it was really good. And the actress who plays the mother is stunning. And I was so struck by her beauty, and the style is great. So it has a 70s vibe because it was made in the 70s, but it has like 60s clothes and hairstyles, and just totally brought me back. And it's also very East Coast, which is my background. So anyway, I looked her up, and Elisa Miller is her name, and she is Jason Patric's mother. So he obviously got her good looks, and her father was Jackie Gleason. So it's a very interesting family. So, and Brooke Shields is adorable in it. And the girl who plays like the evil sister, I'm going to put this in quotes because we'll see how it plays out if you want to watch the movie, is really good. I loved it. I thought it was great. So thanks, Andrew, for introducing me to that film, and I happily lapped it up from TCM. Another movie that I watched on TCM last night was an Elizabeth Taylor film that I had never seen before called Night Watch. It's a British-American film, so Liz Taylor's, who was born in England, it has more of a British accent in this one than we're used to hearing. It is a British-American suspense thriller by Brian G. Hutton. I think that's Timothy Hutton's father, maybe? So the film reunited Elizabeth Taylor with co-star Lawrence Harvey from their 1960 collaboration, Butterfield 8, which is one of my favorites. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie. It's so wonderfully campy and great. I can watch Elizabeth Taylor in just about anything. And I really enjoyed her in this because, well, the movie was based on a play, and you can kind of tell because it's just one setting. It has kind of a Rear Window feeling. And she and her husband are kind of like upper middle class couple. Her clothes, very 70s, were all designed by Valentino. Exquisite. Her hairstyle, her makeup, everything about it I just loved, absolutely loved. And it's a good movie. It's kind of like Gaslight and Rear Window, where she plays a housewife who her first husband died when he was cheating with this young girl, and they were like making out in a speeding car, and it crashed, and so she had to identify the bodies, and that's when she learned that her husband was having an affair. So she was really traumatized by this event, and she's having flashbacks. But now she has a new husband and a very comfortable life, and her best friend is staying there. And there's this old house across the garden from her home, and it takes place in London. She looks across her garden one night, and there's an abandoned old house, and she sees a dead body in the storm. Through the lightning flashes, she sees a body in the window. She tells the cops, she tells her husband and her friend, but nobody really believes her. They think she's crazy. So that's kind of the story, and it has a great twist. And it gets very bloody at the end. I was kind of surprised. It gets into like full slasher mode, which was really fun to see. So I recommend both of those films if you have TCM and you're just looking for something a little different, a little vintage, check them out. All right, so now on to the main event where I'm continuing my rock and roll horror series. So let's just cue the intro. All right, so I threw on this red leather jacket, very 80s. The shoulder pads are quite ginormous to get in the mood for this discussion about my next rock and roll horror book, and that is Shock Rock. This is a really fun anthology. I think I found it in a thrift store. Maybe I bought it on eBay. I don't remember, and I'm not sure if it's in hardback, but if you know, please put it in the comments below. So let's take a look at what's going on in this anthology. All right, this is edited by Jeff Gelb. It came out in Pocket Books in 1992. On Goodreads, this is described as Volume 1, but I could not find the Volume 2. So if I just am missing it, please let me know if you know. I have a few other books by this editor, Hot Blood, and maybe Hotter Blood, Hot Blood 2. I have a couple on my shelf. I read all of the stories in this book a while back, and they have some good ones and some really good authors, including, well, first of all, it has a foreword by Alice Cooper, so that's fun. And it includes stories by Stephen King, which is the first story, and a pretty long one. David Cho, Graham Masterton, who else? Nancy A. Collins. I really liked her story. So the Stephen King story is You Know They Got a Hell of a Band, which is taken from the lyrics. I think the song's called Rock and Roll Heaven by the Righteous Brothers, who, let me tell you, even back in the day were considered a little corny, but it's a good song. If there's a rock and roll heaven, well, you know you've got a hell of a band. Something like that. Sorry for my singing. So this is about a couple who are driving in the Oregon wilderness. They get lost and they end up in a really small town, which is actually rock and roll heaven. And, you know, Elvis is working the gas station and Janis Joplin is slinging hash at the diner. So all of these dead rock stars are inhabiting this town. So it's a little gimmicky, but it's a lot of fun, and I enjoyed that one a lot. So all of these stories kind of examine a different aspect of rock and roll. There's one story called Blood Suede Shoes, and so we're dealing with like 50s rock and roll or more current rock and roll. And I think rock and horror just go great together, whether it's heavy metal or just fun expression of intense emotions. And a little violence, you know, a little headbanging. So yeah, I really enjoyed these stories. A lot of them include real life, either living or dead rock stars, Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix, I mentioned Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, and some others. So this came out in 1992 by Pocket Books. And here's a little bit of the intro by Jeff Gelb, the editor. Rock and roll started turning to horror for song themes long before Michael Jackson's zombie homage Thriller. So this jacket kind of has a Thriller vibe, right? When I was a kid, there were Flying Purple People Eater, I Put a Spell on You, which is such a good song, Haunted House, and Ghost Riders of the Sky, and also great song. What a haunting image that conjured. These were simple songs, often novelties, innocent tips of the hat toward the cheap horror movies of the 50s and 60s, staple drive-in fare for the lust-starved teenagers who spent their remaining allowance money on 45s. As I grew into my 20s, horror was also growing up. A new crop of horror fans turned film directors began to make their mark on movies, with decidedly darker fare than they'd grown up watching on their local creature feature. Romero, Cronenberg, Hooper, Carpenter, and others were exploring a more serious side of horror than their predecessors had. Horror novels were emerging with a newfound sense of purpose. When I began to consider editing a rock and roll horror anthology, I wondered if anyone else would understand my enthusiasm for the idea. Happily, finding writers on my wavelength was not a problem. The stories that flooded my mailbox were passionate, heartfelt excursions into horror by obvious rock music lovers. I mean, someone like Stephen King is, if you know his work, it's obviously a big music guy, a rock music guy, and especially like 50s style music. And I know he played in a band. I'm not sure if he still does. They have created a unique collection, certainly the first horror anthology that almost demands its own soundtrack. So crank up your stereo, settle back, and read for yourself that rock and roll and horror are here to stay. I sure hope so. You know, I'm not saying that rock ever really went away, but I sure am waiting for the young kids to do a new rock and roll revival. It's way overdue. One rock and roll artist that really comes to mind whenever I think of rock and horror done so well is Rocky Erickson with his 1981 album, The Evil One. It's so good. If you're looking for a good record, just great rock and roll, but if you're looking for a great record to listen to around Halloween, I highly recommend it. I was actually in for like 2 weekends a few years ago, a Rocky Erickson cover band called The Evil Ones. We had a lot of fun with that. Maybe I'll put a little clip from it at one of the parties that we played. So yes, I'm a rock chick going way back, and it's just my favorite type of music. If you're familiar with shock rock, please let me know in the comments below. And if you have any other rock and roll horror suggestions, either films or books, I would love to hear your thoughts. So that's all I have for today. Thanks for stopping by my haunted library, and I'll see you soon. Bye.